Thanks for joining me here for the Daily Bread Bible Study. This is day 234 for Friday, August 21st, 2020, focusing on the book of Lamentations, chapters 1 and 2. Just like every book, when we enter a new one, I'd like to give a little overview of it. So we have kind of the foreshadowing of the book of Lamentations all the way back in 2nd Chronicles 35. In verse 25, it says, Jeremiah also uttered a lamentation for Josiah, and all the singing men and singing women have spoken of Josiah in their laments to this day. They made these a custom in Israel. They are recorded in the laments. As much as we like to focus on the King Josiah, and as this is kind of the biblical idea of the book of Lamentations, we see that it's probably not as directly related, right? The prophet Jeremiah is said to have written Lamentations over the death of King Josiah, but this lament feels both similar and distinct from the book of Lamentations. Now, what was mentioned in 2nd Chronicles 35, it is distinct in this sense that the name Josiah does not appear at all in the book of Lamentations. And also, the subject material is different. It seems to be focused in specifically on the fall of Jerusalem due to the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem and this is well after King Josiah's death, at that time after his son Jehoiakim takes over and all of that too. But it's also very similar because the style is a lament. It is lamenting, grieving the desolation to come, and it describes something Jeremiah prophesied about often, even to King Josiah, which was the foreshadowed destruction of Jerusalem and the suffering that the people would have at the hands of the Babylonians. Now, one more note before we jump in. The book has specific poetic forms that are lost in English and maintained in Hebrew. I do notice that the first two chapters both have 22 verses, which often in Hebrew literature could indicate the Hebrew alphabet, so it could be an acrostic poetry here, but at the same time, I'm not really familiar with the structures of this book, so I'm going to move on more to discussing the content at this time. So without further ado, Lamentations begins in Lamentations 1, verse 1, How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. The idea is that Jerusalem has been sacked, and it is a desolation compared to what it once was. In Lamentations 1, verse 3, it says, Judah has gone into exile with suffering and hard servitude. She lives now among the nations and finds no resting place. Her pursuers have all overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The writer, which is often attributed to the prophet Jeremiah, describes the desolate feelings of Judah after the fall of Jerusalem. Babylon, a kingdom from the north, comes, sieges, and exiles most of the people. All of this is claimed to have been from the Lord, who is bringing consequence upon Judah for their past unfaithfulness. In Lamentations 1, verse 5, Her foes have become the masters, her enemies prosper, because the Lord has made her suffer for the multitude of her transgressions. And in verse 7, Zion stretches out her hand, but there is no one to comfort her. The Lord has commanded against Jacob that his neighbors should become his foes. This deals a lot with the idolatry of worshiping other gods, and in fact, the challenge of moving over the altar of the Lord in the temple of the Lord, the temple of Solomon, in order to make way for an altar to another god there up north. So, all of this dysfunction, in retrospect, as they are writing about it, is what they are critiquing, and what they have come to theologize is the reason that Jerusalem fell to this kingdom of the north, to Babylon. Now in Lamentations chapter 2, the list of actions that the Lord took against Zion is significant. Words such as destroyed, withdrawn his right hand, burned, bent the bow, killed, become like an enemy, and even more so in Lamentations 2, verse 7, the Lord has scorned his altar, disowned his sanctuary. Not only is it that people disown the sanctuary by moving over the altar of the Lord and adding altars to other gods there, but that God has ultimately scorned it in the view of Lamentations. That God has rejected this temple, saying that overall God doesn't need a place on earth to reside. God is majestic, capable, and interacts through various mediums and ways. And when the temple of the Lord was first desired to be built, they said, do I really need a home? All this time I've been wandering around in the tabernacle, but now you want to make me a home. And King David, who was the one who actually planned it, was wanting to make this happen, especially so that way people could worship God and know where to find God. And that temple was built, but ultimately it kind of got taken down in disrepair. That other gods slowly moved their ways in, and people really, it did not become the place to worship God quite in the way that David had hoped. Now, for the writer of Lamentations, the situation was bad, and is really bad because people's hearts were turning away from God. Thus, the Lord turns away from them, even rejecting the temple of Solomon built in his name. God refused to be present in the place originally dedicated to God, and that is significant indeed. The suffering related to this reckoning, this God essentially abandoning Jerusalem in its time of need, elicits a strong emotional image. In Lamentations 2, verse 11, infants and babes faint in the streets of the city. They cry to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" As they faint like the wounded in the streets of the city, as their life is poured out on their mother's bosom. I want and hope to protect my kids. I want to provide for them, have their needs met, to not have them to have to go hungry or to suffer. I want them to have what they need to succeed. And the imagery is of children not having their basic needs met and suffering because of it. And this imagery really breaks my heart. So, in Lamentations 2:21, the images continue to be rough. The young and old are lying on the ground in the streets. My young women and men have fallen by the sword. Indeed, there is much to lament about. May you never have to experience anything like this. May God bless you all of your days. And may these laments be far from you.